Welcome to BrainStuff, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hey, BrainStuff, Lauren Vogelbaum here. You can thank a mad Bavarian king for the opening credits to every Disney movie. Before Walt Disney built Disneyland, he and his wife Lillian toured Europe, including a stop at the magnificent Neuschwanstein Castle in the Bavarian Alps of Germany. Disney was so impressed with the skyscraping turrets and towers of this faux Romanesque structure that he used it as the model for Sleeping Beauty's castle, the centerpiece of Disneyland, and now the ubiquitous logo of Walt Disney Pictures. But if Disney had known the real story of Neuschwanstein and its fairy tale king, an eccentric opera fan who was declared a madman before dying under mysterious circumstances, he might have chosen a different castle. Neuschwanstein Castle is one of the most visited tourist destinations in Europe, welcoming more than 6,000 visitors on busy days in the summer. But the man who dreamed up the fantastical castle never intended for it to be open to the public. It began as an architectural love letter to the German composer Richard Wagner and evolved into a refuge for a reclusive king who slowly lost his grip on reality. King Ludwig II never fit the mold of a stoic monarch. Born in 1845, he was raised in princely elegance in his father Maximilian II's castle, Hohenschwangau, where the young royal, quote, enjoyed dressing up and took pleasure in play acting, according to his mother, Marie of Prussia. From an early age, Ludwig had a vivid imagination and a flair for the dramatic. Hohenschwangau, built in 1832 in the Gothic style, was decorated with paintings drawn from medieval German legends and poetry, and young Ludwig particularly identified with Lohengrin, a legendary knight of the Holy Grail who traveled on a boat pulled by swans. When Maximilian II died suddenly in 1864, Ludwig, then 18 years old, was thrust into power. Unprepared for any serious political leadership, one of the first things Ludwig did as king was to invite his musical idol Wagner to come to Munich for an opera festival. Wagner was also obsessed with German medieval legends and had even written an opera version of the Lohengrin story in 1850. Wagner, who was in dire financial straits, eagerly accepted Ludwig's invitation, and the young king became one of the composer's chief patrons. When they met, Wagner didn't know what to make of the otherworldly Ludwig. Wagner wrote, "Today I was brought to him. He is unfortunately so beautiful and wise, soulful and lordly, that I fear his life must fade away like a divine dream in this base world. You cannot imagine the magic of his regard. If he remains alive, it will be a great miracle." Wagner couldn't have predicted it, but just 2 years later, in 1866, Bavaria and Austria suffered a humiliating defeat to Prussia in the 7 Weeks' War, and Ludwig was stripped of all real power. It was then, historians believe, that Ludwig decided to retreat into a fantasy kingdom in the Alps, dedicated to Wagner, an alternate reality in which he could play out his operatic daydreams full of Christian knights and magical swans. Ludwig already had the perfect location picked out, a rocky promontory near his childhood castle with 360-degree views of pristine alpine lakes, lush valleys, and towering peaks. He wrote a letter to Wagner describing his plans to build a far more ambitious version of his father's Hohenschwangau. Quote, "The location is one of the most beautiful to be found, holy and unapproachable, a worthy temple for the divine friend who has brought salvation and true blessing to the world." To bring his vision to life, Ludwig enlisted a theatrical set designer and scene painter from Munich named Christian Jung to make some appropriately dramatic drawings of the new Hohenschwangau, as Ludwig called it. It was meant to be an idealized version of a medieval castle, inspired by a visit to the legitimately medieval Wartburg Palace, but cranked up to an 11. Ludwig wanted 200 well-appointed rooms, a cavernous singer's hall for opera performances, ornate walled gardens, and even a knight's bath akin to the ritual baths used by the Knights of the Holy Grail. But rather than being a complete throwback, the castle was to include the latest technological comforts, including electric lighting, flush toilets, central heating, and an electric buzzer system for summoning servants.